Sometimes the most pivotal moments in history, the things that decide who lives and who dies, they hinge on the most unbelievable, almost comical details. And we're about to dive into one of the weirdest stories from World War II, a story that proves that point in a way you just won't see coming.
I mean, it sounds like the start of a really bad joke, doesn't it? But for the crew of the German U-boat U-1206, this wasn't a joke at all. It was a very real life or death situation playing out hundreds of feet beneath the surface of the North Sea.
So, on the one hand, you have this a Type VIC U boat, a genuine predator of the deep, one of the feared wolves of the sea, a true machine of war. And right next to it, well, that's the piece of high tech gear that brought it all down a toilet. The contrast is just, it's incredible, and it's the whole reason we're telling this story.
So how on earth does a cutting-edge warship meet its doom, not in some glorious battle, but with a flush? Well, it's a wild story of high-tech dreams running smack into a very basic and very, very messy reality.
Okay, let's just lay out the facts. It's April 14th, 1945. We're talking mere weeks before the end of the war in Europe. The U-1206 is brand new, on its very first combat mission. And after just 8 days, it's over. Not because of an enemy ship, not from a depth charge, but because the toilet broke. To really wrap your head around how this is even possible, we need to kind of zoom out for a second. Because this isn't really a story about a toilet. It's a story about the brutal, unforgiving chemistry of just trying to stay alive inside a sealed metal tube deep underwater.
Seriously, just think about it for a second. You're in a totally closed off box. Every single breath you take is literally changing the composition of the air around you. Every battery, every engine has the potential to spit out something that could kill you all. Survival is this constant, second-by-second fight against Chemistry 101.
And this is a perfect way to visualize it. This simple plastic bottle submarine, the kind of thing you might see in a science class, it explains everything. The principles keeping a subcrew alive aren't some kind of magic. It's the exact same chemistry you learned in high school. And just like in this little model, if one tiny thing goes wrong, the whole system can collapse.
And this table just lays it out so clearly. Look at this. The air you're breathing, that's just gas absorption. The massive batteries powering the whole sub, that's electrochemistry, which, whoops, can accidentally make poison gas. Every single critical function on this warship comes right back to a basic chemistry concept.
So the crew was basically living on a knife's edge with two huge chemical threats, 24/7. First, their own breath was producing carbon dioxide that could poison them, so it had to be constantly scrubbed out of the air. And second, any random leak, like seawater splashing onto battery acid, could whip up a whole new, even deadlier gas. That was just a normal Tuesday for these guys.
Okay, so now let's go back to the U-1206 on that fateful day. Now that you understand the incredibly delicate chemical balance on that boat, you can see exactly how a simple plumbing problem spiraled into an absolute disaster. At the heart of it all is this thing, the deep water high-pressure toilet. Now, on paper, it's a brilliant idea, right? No more having to surface just to get rid of waste, but in reality, it was a beast. A series of complex valves and chambers that you had to operate in a perfectly precise sequence. It was so complicated, they had a specially trained guy on board just to operate it.
And here is the domino effect from hell. Someone, and we'll get to who later, turns the valves in the wrong order. A jet of seawater, under the crushing pressure of being 200 feet deep, just blasts back into the submarine. That water floods the toilet compartment and has nowhere to go but down, right into the compartment with the sub's huge batteries. And that is when chemistry takes the wheel.
And there it is, the fatal recipe. When you mix salt water with battery acid and an electric current, you get electrolysis. And the result? Hydrogen. And much, much worse, chlorine gas. A choking, deadly poison now filling the tight, sealed space of the submarine. It was a death sentence.
And you don't have to take my word for it. These are the words of the U-boat's commander, Karl-Adolf Schlitt. It's just chilling. The gas fills the boat. They can't dive. They can't move. Their only choice is a frantic emergency ascent to the surface, where they pop up right in the middle of British patrols. He had no other option. He had to order them to abandon ship and sink the boat themselves.
But wait, hold on a second. The story about the captain getting beaten by a futuristic toilet is pretty memorable for sure. But is it the whole truth? As with a lot of these stories from history, the moment you start digging, things get a little complicated.
Just look at this. On one side, you have the toilet story. It mostly blames the captain for using the thing wrong. Classic human error. But then you have Captain Schlitt's official report, and he tells a totally different story. He says he was in the engine room and that the leak was from a mechanical failure, maybe because they bumped into another shipwreck on the ocean floor. So, which story is true?
So how do you settle a debate like that over 75 years after the fact? Well, the answer isn't in a book. It's lying at the bottom of the North Sea. Because history isn't just written on paper. It's also written in rust and coral on the seabed. This map really shows you how history isn't always set in stone. The official reason for U-boats' loss can completely change as new evidence, like the wreck itself, is found and studied. What everyone believed in 1945 could be totally wrong based on a discovery made decades later. The shipwreck becomes the key witness.
And that's exactly what happened with our U-boat. In the 70s, workers laying an oil pipeline found the wreck of U-1206. An archaeological survey looked at the site, and what they found suggested it was actually possible the sub had collided with another wreck down there. Now, this doesn't prove the captain's story, but it sure makes it sound a lot more believable. The funny toilet story suddenly isn't so simple, and the truth is still up for debate.
But look, whether it was a toilet or a collision, the end result was the same, right? A scuttled U-boat and a crew that had to surrender. And this brings us to the final and honestly, the most amazing irony in this whole story. Look at this number, 75%. That was the death rate for German U-boat sailors in World War II. Let that sink in. 3 out of every 4 men who shipped out on these submarines never came home. It was, without a doubt, one of the most dangerous jobs in the entire war on any side. And now look at this photograph. These are the 46 men from U-1206 who survived, pictured right after they were captured. Yeah, they look defeated, but they're alive. They are the lucky ones who didn't end up as another number in that horrifying 75% statistic. So just think about this for a second. That embarrassing, catastrophic, mission-ending failure was, almost certainly, the single luckiest thing that ever happened to those men. That malfunction didn't just sink their submarine, it saved their lives. If they had kept going on their patrol, the odds were overwhelmingly stacked against them ever seeing their homes again. And that just leaves you with this one last thought. The absolute worst day of Captain Schlitt's professional career, the most humiliating end to his first command, was the very thing that guaranteed he and most of his crew would live to see the end of the war. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How often are the worst moments of our lives actually a blessing in disguise?